December 19th, 1944. A frozen ridgeline west of PRM. A German Tiger crew sees an American vehicle in the distance. Not a Sherman, not a heavy tank. A thin-skinned M18 Hellcat, sitting low behind a rise. Barely more than a gun bolted to an engine and a turret. The range is just under 2,000 yards. By every rule those men have been taught, they are safe. The Tiger's frontal armor is too thick. The American gun is too small. The Hellcat is dangerous, only if it gets close. And close is the one thing it has not done. So the Tiger commander does not panic. He does not reverse. He does not order smoke. He watches the American gun settle onto his hull and waits for the useless shot. The shell crosses the frozen air faster than sound. It does not behave like the shells the Tiger has survived for months. It does not smash itself flat against the hardened face of the armor. It does not burst apart in a shower of harmless fragments. Inside that shell is a dense silver, gray core, tungsten carbide. A material German armor was not built to break. The core hits, the Tiger's armor fails, and in the space of a heartbeat, the most feared tank on the Western Front learns that the old safety distance is gone. This is not the story of a better tank defeating the Tiger. It is the story of a worse protected vehicle, carrying a better idea, a small idea, a hidden idea, a bullet with the wrong metal inside it. And by the winter of 1944, that idea was starting to erase one of Germany's last battlefield advantages. For 3 years, the Tiger had been more than a tank. It was a calculation. Its 88mm gun could kill Allied armor before most Allied crews could effectively answer. At long range, the Tiger did not need to rush. It could wait. It could measure. It could fire first from distances where the return shot was more hope than threat. That was the psychological power of the Tiger. Not just armor. Not just a gun. Distance. Distance gave German crews time. Distance gave them patience. Distance turned the battlefield into a shooting gallery where the Tiger decided when the duel began. And the armor completed the promise. 100mm of face. Hardened steel on the front. Hard outside. Tougher beneath. A shell striking that surface had to do more than carry energy. It had to survive the impact. Most did not. Conventional American armor, piercing rounds often broke against the hardened face layer before they could punch into the softer metal behind it. The impact looked violent. The result was failure. A flash, a crack, a scar on the plate. Then the Tiger kept fighting. That was the old math, and German crews trusted it because it had kept them alive. The man in this story had trusted it longer than most. His name, in the surviving patrol notes, was recorded as Feldwebel Ernst Voss, 33 years old. A professional tanker by habit, not by romance. He did not speak about invincibility. He spoke about range, angles, reload time, ground pressure, sight picture. His gunner, Karl Meinhardt, had the quiet arrogance of a man who had watched the 88 do exactly what it was designed to do again and again. Sherman at 1,500 meters, Churchill at 1,800, tank destroyer at 1,200. If it made the mistake of pausing in the open, the crew did not think in myths. They thought in tables. The tables told them where danger began. The tables told them where danger ended. And for American 76mm guns, those tables had always drawn a comforting line. At long range, the Tiger lived. The enemy died. The M18 Hellcat seemed to prove that line. It was fast, very fast. The fastest tracked armored fighting vehicle America fielded in the war. On roads, it could move like something that did not belong in a tank battle. It could appear, fire, and disappear before a heavier German vehicle, but it paid for that speed and armor. The front of the turret was thin. The hull was thinner. Its crew was protected from rifle fire and shell splinters, not from a direct hit by an 88. German reports described the vehicle with respect, but not fear. Dangerous in ambush, dangerous at close range, dead if caught in the open. Voss had already seen one burn. In autumn, near a wooded road outside the Moselle, his platoon caught an American tank destroyer as it tried to shift positions. Meinhardt fired once. The 88 found the thin hull. The vehicle flashed white, then black. No one in Voss's crew forgot the speed of the Hellcat. But no one changed the doctrine. The lesson seemed obvious. Do not let it get close. At distance, kill it. That was the rule. What Voss did not know was that behind American lines, the problem had stopped being the gun. It had become the projectile. American engineers had studied the failure of standard armor, piercing shells against German face, hardened plate, and found the cruel part of the equation. More velocity alone was not enough. A faster shell that shattered on impact was still a failed shell. The metal had to stay whole long enough to do the work. That answer came from outside the romance of tank design. Not a thicker turret, not a larger engine, not a heroic crew. A material used in factories. Tungsten carbide, dense, hard, expensive, brutally resistant to deformation. The kind of material that could cut steel in a machine shop and, if shaped correctly, could keep its nose together when ordinary hardened steel gave up. At Watertown Arsenal and Aberdeen Proving Ground, engineers began wrapping small tungsten carbide cores inside lighter carriers. The outside body helped the round fit the barrel. The core did the killing. The idea was simple enough to explain in one sentence, and hard enough to manufacture that the Army could not hand it to everyone. The round became known as HVAP, high-velocity armor piercing. It was not magic. It had rules. It hated bad angles. It was scarce. It was expensive. It needed careful targeting, but when it struck close to square, against armor that had been trained to destroy ordinary projectiles, it changed the fight. A 76mm gun that had once looked marginal against a Tiger frontally at long range suddenly became something else. Not a guaranteed answer, not a miracle, but a real threat. And that was enough to destroy the old doctrine. Because a doctrine built on immunity does not survive partial danger. It only has to become uncertain. By late 1944, small lots of HVAP had reached American tank destroyer battalions. Crews did not receive mountains of it. They received a handful, sometimes 20 rounds, sometimes less, sometimes enough to change a single engagement, not an entire campaign. The instructions were clear. Do not waste it on soft targets. Do not waste it on vehicles standard ammunition can kill. Save it for the heavy stuff. Tigers, Panthers, the steel that had embarrassed ordinary shells. To the Americans, the rounds became almost private knowledge. A different shell for a different kind of target. To the Germans, they appeared first as rumors. An impossible penetration here. A Panther turret pierced at a range where it should have been safe. A tank destroyer shot that did not match the expected damage. Fragments with an odd gray shine. Reports moved upward. Analysts made cautious notes. Maybe improved hardening. Maybe tungsten. Maybe limited issue. Nothing that required a complete rewrite of armored doctrine. That was the fatal mistake. The German intelligence system saw the clue. It did not understand the size of the doorway the clue had opened. On the morning of December 19th, Voss's patrol moved through the Eifel in the frozen calm that followed the first shock of the Ardennes offensive. The big attack had begun days earlier. Roads were jammed. Fuel was already becoming a whisper nobody wanted to say aloud. Orders still used confident language. Breakthrough. Advance. Exploit. But the men in the vehicles saw the truth in smaller details. Maintenance crews working in the dark, drivers sleeping against warm engine decks, fuel drums counted twice, snow packed into track teeth. At 10:40, Voss halted on a low ridge overlooking a shallow valley. 2 Tigers. 1 Panzer IV. A patrol, not a grand assault. The terrain ahead looked harmless. A winter field, a dark tree line, a farm track half, buried under snow. No large American formation, no artillery barrage, only the silence that makes soldiers lean harder into their instruments. At 11:12, the radio operator caught broken American traffic. Tank destroyer frequencies nearby. Voss raised his binoculars. For almost a minute, he saw nothing. Then the gunner spoke. Movement near the trees. There it was, low silhouette, open-top turret, fast enough that it seemed to slide rather than roll. An M18 Hellcat crossed a gap and vanished behind a swell in the ground. Range 2,000 yards. Maybe a little more. The second Tiger behind Voss turned its turret toward the same line. The Panzer IV pulled back instinctively, too light to enjoy the exchange. Voss did not order withdrawal. Why would he? The Hellcat had shown itself at the one distance where its speed no longer mattered. If it rushed closer, Meinhardt would kill it. If it fired from there, the shot would fail. The American vehicle settled hull down behind the rise. Only its turret and gun were clear. That made it harder to hit. Not harder to survive. Meinhardt tracked it through the sight. The American gun stopped moving. He's on us, Meinhardt said. Voss answered without raising his voice. Let him fire, then we answer. Voss was not foolish. He was not reckless. He was applying lessons paid for in burned Allied tanks across 3 years of war. And for those lessons to betray him, something deeper than courage had to change. The first HVAP round left the Hellcat's barrel. For a fraction of a second, both crews were living inside 2 different wars. The German crew was still in the war of face, hardened armor, and long-range immunity. The American crew was in the war of metallurgy. The tungsten-core struck the Tiger's front plate near the driver's side, close enough to square for the material to do what it was built to do. The outer shell broke away. The core kept going. Steel spalled inward. Hot fragments filled the compartment. The driver died instantly. The radio operator folded forward over his set. Voss felt a hammer blow against his ribs and thought, absurdly, that the turret had been hit from the side. Then smoke climbed through the fighting compartment, and the old world ended. Out. That was all he could say at first, then louder. Out. Now. The loader forced the hatch open. Meinhardt climbed after him, coughing black smoke. Voss dragged himself through the cupola and dropped onto the frozen ground hard enough to tear the breath out of his chest. For a moment, he lay beside his own tank, looking at the front armor that had just failed him. No flame yet, no explosion, just smoke and the terrible stillness of a machine that had been made blind in one blow. Behind him, the second Tiger moved forward too fast, too angry. Its commander had seen the impossible and tried to answer before understanding it. The 88 fired. The round hit low, throwing dirt and snow from the ridge below the Hellcat. The American vehicle rocked in the blast, reversed a few feet, then settled again. The second Tiger fired again. Another near miss. Then the Hellcat fired its second HVAP round. This one struck the turret front of the advancing Tiger. The penetration was not neat. It found something volatile inside. The turret hatches burst open. Flame licked out through the seams. Nobody climbed out. From first sighting to silence, the engagement lasted less than 15 minutes. 2 Tigers destroyed or disabled. 1 Hellcat gone back behind the rise. No duel of armored giants. No heroic charge. No tank better than the Tiger rolling through the smoke. Just a lightly armored machine that fired 2 rare rounds from the edge of the old safety zone, and proved the zone no longer existed. The report that followed was hard for German officers to accept. Not because the witnesses were unreliable, because the implications were too expensive. If the range was correct, then the Tiger could still kill the Hellcat. But it could no longer assume the Hellcat could not kill back. That single change poisoned everything. A Tiger crew that had once held position calmly at 1,800 meters now had to ask a new question. What kind of ammunition is in that American gun? The answer was unknowable from the other side of the valley. And unknowable danger is worse for discipline than visible danger. Commanders began hearing versions of the same story. An M18 firing from a range that should have been safe. A Panther penetrated from the front. A heavy tank crew abandoning a position because the old confidence no longer felt honest. Some officers dismissed the reports. Some adjusted immediately. Some split the difference, which is what military organizations often do when the truth is arriving faster than doctrine. They told crews to use movement, to avoid sitting exposed, to treat American tank destroyers with greater caution. But by then the Wehrmacht's problem was not only tactical, it was mechanical. Fuel was short, recovery vehicles were scarce, air cover was fading. A doctrine that demanded smarter movement was being handed to units that could barely keep their tanks moving at all. The Tiger remained dangerous. That matters. The M93 HVAP round did not make German armor obsolete overnight. It did not turn every Hellcat into a monster. The tungsten-core needed good geometry. When it hit too steeply, or at the wrong angle, its greatest strength could become a weakness. Because it held its shape, it could skate or deflect where another projectile might bite and deform. American crews had to learn that lesson in blood. In February, 1 tank destroyer platoon fired HVAP from a high, awkward angle into the sloped armor of German Panthers. The shots looked good. The range was reasonable. The ammunition was precious. But the impacts were wrong. No penetrations, the Panthers answered. 2 American vehicles were hit before the platoon broke contact. That was the other half of the tungsten story. Technology had changed the envelope. It had not removed the need for judgment. A rare round fired at the wrong angle was only an expensive mistake. Training circulars began catching up with battlefield reality. Get square. Do not waste HVAP from extreme obliques. Save it for heavy armor. Make the geometry work before you spend the round. This was not glamorous advice. It was the difference between a miracle weapon and a dead crew. By late February 1945, some American tank destroyer units had become very good at the new math. Near the Rohr crossings where engineers fought mud, current, shellfire, and time. German armor tried to reach a temporary bridge that American divisions needed to keep moving east. The bridge was not cinematic. It was planks, steel, cable, mud, shouted orders, and men who knew one lucky shell could turn a crossing into a bottleneck. A company of Hellcats waited on a tree, lined rise with a limited supply of HVAP. Not enough for a careless battle, enough for a disciplined one. The German column came in with Panthers first, heavier vehicles behind them. The range opened around 1,600 yards. The angles were clean. The American commander held fire until the sight picture matched the lesson. Then the Hellcats fired. 1 Panther stopped with a round through the turret front. A second tried to turn and exposed more side than it meant to show. It burned. A third pushed forward, trying to close distance and make the engagement old again. It never reached the range it wanted. The heavy vehicles behind the Panthers slowed, then stopped. For 90 seconds, the column did almost nothing. That pause may have mattered as much as the penetrations, because the Germans were not only losing vehicles, They were recalculating belief. The tanks that should have dominated the range had just been hurt at the range. The armor still existed. The guns still existed. But the confidence had cracked. And once it cracked, every American muzzle flash along the tree line became a question. Is that one carrying the silver core? The German attack withdrew before it reached the bridge. Not because the Hellcat was tougher. It was not. Not because the Tiger and Panther had become weak. They had not. The attack withdrew because a small number of correct shots, fired with correct ammunition from correct angles, had turned a long-range German advantage into a mutual risk. That was enough. Sometimes in war, enough is the revolution. The men who created that revolution did not look like the men who usually receive monuments. They were metallurgists, machinists, ordnance engineers, civilian specialists who argued over brittleness, density, machining time, sabot fit, and impact behavior. They fought a quieter war against procurement tables and material shortages. Tungsten was not just a battlefield metal. It was a factory metal. Every pound used in a shell could not be used in cutting tools that made more engines, more guns, more parts, more war. So the hesitation was not stupid. It was practical. The army did not withhold tungsten because it failed to care about tank crews. It hesitated because war is a system of shortages disguised as strategy. But the battlefield eventually made the argument impossible to ignore. A shell that cost too much in 1942 looked different, after enough reports of American rounds breaking harmlessly against German armor. A material too precious to fire casually became worth firing carefully. The tungsten-core did not win the war by itself. No single round did. Germany was being crushed by fuel shortage, air power, logistics collapse, Soviet pressure in the East, Allied pressure in the West, and the simple arithmetic of a war it could no longer sustain. But within that larger collapse, the HVAP round did something precise. It removed certainty. It told German heavy tank crews that the front plate was no longer a promise. It told American tank destroyer crews that distance was no longer only the enemy's friend. It turned a thin-skinned vehicle from a close-range ambusher into a long-range threat under the right conditions. And it proved that armor warfare was not only a contest of machines, it was a contest of materials. That is why the frozen ridge matters. Not because two tigers decided the war. They did not. Not because the Hellcat became invincible. It never was. The ridge matters because of what died there. An assumption, a range table, a comfortable sentence repeated in briefings by men who believed the facts had stopped changing. At 2,000 yards, they cannot hurt us. After that winter, no careful tanker on the Western Front could say that sentence the same way. The Tiger remained terrifying. Its gun could still kill. Its armor could still save lives. Its silhouette could still tighten the throat of any Allied crew that saw it through field glasses. But it was no longer untouchable at the distances that had once made it feel almost unfair. The battlefield had found a new answer, not a louder answer. Not a bigger one, a smaller one, harder, denser, hidden inside the shell until the instant it arrived. The myth of the Tiger did not end because its armor vanished. It ended because one day, from a frozen American gun position, a little silver core reached the armor before the myth could move, and the steel that had carried German confidence for 3 years finally met a metal that did not blink.